Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Carker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the chapter itself connects to the rest of the series as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are discussing for the episode. This is Chapter 109, Like a Tiger Trying Not to Crush the Flowers. I can cut him. I can cut him. I know I can take him. I know I can win. There. I knew you could do it. But don't relax yet. Stay alert. Stay alert. Right, Ichigo Kurosaki. Kenny looks happy. Bleach, Chapter 109, Like a Tiger Trying Not to Crush the Flowers. I see. Then Captain Aizen really is. Yes. By the time he was taken down from the sacred wall, he was no longer breathing. We're looking into all the possibilities, including a Gigai being used as a disguise, but for now, all we know is that he's dead. A Gigai is a temporary body used by Soul Reapers in emergencies. 5th Company's Captain Sosuke Aizen is gone. Retsu Unohana, Captain of the 4th Company. When all this trouble is behind us, leadership of the 5th Company will be decided at a captain's meeting in Central Chamber 46. Please, return to your companies. I'll join you soon in the field. Captain Tosin, Captain Komamura. Shuhei Isagi, Assistant Captain, 9th Company. Is he? I see. Captain Aizen is dead. Resolving this problem is the quickest path to the truth. Then you mean? Yes. I'm joining the battle. It's usually best to avoid such things. Kaname Tosin, Captain, 9th Company. But there seems to be no alternative. A battle, eh? If humans didn't let themselves be deceived by ugly emotions, there would be no battles, and many tragedies could be avoided. I hate battles. Good! Your reactions are excellent! And you're concentrating more. Now you're hearing the bells. The bells. The eye patch. I put them on to make the fight more interesting. But they're wasted if you don't exploit them. Huh. You're mocking me. That's why you haven't called on your Zenpakuto. You'd better watch out. My sword could cut you now. My Zenpakuto has no name. What? My sword is bare. It was never sealed. This blade is my Zenpakuto. Really? I'm glad to hear it. That means it won't get any stronger. In that case, what? You could win? Is that what you think? You're the one who should be careful. I haven't sealed my Zenpakto because my spiritual energy is so great it can't be contained. That's why when I fight, I have to restrain myself. Do you understand? If I didn't, our fight would be over. I told you to keep your spiritual pressure sharp. Only a fool would relax thinking he can win. What a disappointing finish. Hello, everybody. I'm Yasuchika Imura, third seat of the fourth company, who many say is better looking without glasses. With pen in hand, I express the anguish of middle management personnel in the form of a daily clinical log. I hope you read this all the way to the end. That is it for Bleach Chapter 109, treading on the tiger with the daisies. I'm not going to remember it. I'm terrible at remembering these chapter titles. It is 109, like a tiger trying not to crush the flowers. That's it. I should, really try to make a greater effort to remember these, but we'll get away with it. Surely no one will ever be critical of my inability to remember something 5 minutes after reading it. Certainly. Look, right now you guys aren't paying me enough for this to be my job, so I don't need to. Make it my full-time job and I'll remember every damn chapter title like it's my life dependent on it. But, we'll get there. We'll get there when we get there, won't we? We'll get there when we get there. Let's talk about Bleach. Let's talk about Chapter 109, like a tiger trying not to crush the flowers. I do think this is a pretty handsome chapter. I love this shot of Ichigo, this very dynamic, like, yeah, I just made the cut. It's really cool because this brings us immediately from the last chapter. So again, talking about that volumetric format, talking about Kubo writing this to be collected, it's because he expects you to pick up literally as if you're reading it sequentially, as if you don't even have that 1 week break, as if you're just following it along, and then furthermore, certain plot threads that he introduces aren't going to be picked up for several chapters later, and so being able to read this back to back to back lets you kind of keep those things in your mind more readily. That said, I'm here to guide you. Ooh, excuse me, I'm also here to cough. Oof, just having a whole time this episode. Anyway, here to guide you through this. I really do like that we get this cleave of Zangetsu, and then the next panel shows us the end of the blade. That's pretty cool. We get the typical Doom SFX there. I love this intercut of Ichigo, like, very hype on his own supply, right? As he's excited that he knows that he can cut him, and really, Zaraki's expression says everything. The fact that he's got this little frown at his cut, that he's not really bereaved of it, he's not really shocked anymore. The cut honestly looks much more minor and insignificant than the one that we had in the previous chapter, as the reality of this little flesh wound becomes obvious. And I love that, of course, this immediately gets called out as we get this ferocious smile on Zaraki, like, oh great, you finally just reached the bar minimum to actually engage in this fight. And of course, Ichigo is shocked at that. Like, he's wounded his opponent, and his opponent's just excited about that. Of course, this does make Ichigo start to kind of have a moment of shock as he goes to grasp Zangetsu with both hands, and I love Zaraki expressing, like, hey, look, don't relax, you gotta stay alert, like, kind of mocking Ichigo for that, reiteration that he's having as Zaraki expresses rights, like he's inside of Ichigo's head here. Ichiru's having a laugh about this, and she notes that, Kenpachi does look happy, as we do see that he does. He's finally able to enjoy the fight. Doesn't feel like he's just chasing rabbits. Doesn't feel like he's just predating somebody, but he's actually having a battle. And I love this, the largeness of this panel. We haven't had a panel this kind of large, and it's also our title panel, which is nice coming in this title page. Now it is all black, even though it's not flashback, so it does kind of break our visual convention. But because it is a title page, perhaps that's kind of what it's doing, is to make the title stand out more, the Bleach stand out more. But I do love just how big of a clash this is, how small our characters are. You get to really see the force. I love the rubble even coming up around Ichigo's feet as Kenpachi slams down into Zangetsu, this very powerful strike, and it really reads quite clearly. I do want to take a moment in this chapter and really focus on the choreography of this fight and how effectively Kubo conveys the action. That even like panels like this one, like which don't have a lot of lead-in action to them. Like if we go to the previous one, the most that we get here is we have Kenpachi kind of charging forward. So this is the anticipatory action, right? Is that we have this charge forward. We have the sound effect that is kind of unsheathing across himself, so you can kind of read that as the blade coming out. But nevertheless, like this is really the only we turn page into this, so you really have like a panel and a page turn into anticipation. And we get delivered this big slash, but it reads very clearly. Like you can tell very obviously the action that's happening on page. And it seems like an obvious thing. Like, yeah, I can tell what's going to happen. But like you would be surprised how many big name, like published in Shonen Jump, Shonen manga, get this sort of stuff wrong. There's so many manga where the action is very difficult to read. So much of it where like just the flow of it doesn't benefit the readership of the series. Like the fact that like it just becomes nebulous and lacks the sort of impact that it should have. And I feel like Bleach always has been very well choreographed, always like from the beginning really. But you'll see it become more and more developed as we go along. I really love like one of my favorite interactions is the one with Ichigo and Ichimaru Gen at the gates of Seirite. Just the choreography of that is fantastic, but I think that really this fight with Zaraki stands out as some of the best stuff that we've gotten so far in the manga. So I do want to take some time throughout this volume, but especially this chapter, to really highlight the effectiveness of the panel use, the efficiency at which Kubo is delivering these strikes and giving this heft and weight and power to this back and forth between Ichigo and Zaraki, and how that reflects the kind of larger back and forth between the two of them that's happening with their resolve and the excitement of the fight and their willpower. We cut back and we actually finally get introduced to a number of captains that we haven't really before. Now Tosin did speak for a little bit before, but he was not named, and we finally get to see a little bit more of his design, and we'll speak on a little bit of that right now. So here we get Tosin. Interestingly enough, we have him like asking right here where Tosin and Komamura, we've seen them kind of together, I think in every time that we've seen them so far. So we'll talk on that briefly too. But it's interesting here that even though we're coming from the front, Unohana's face is kind of in shadow as we don't quite know right the situation with Aizen. Now we as readers already know that Aizen's been proclaimed dead, and this has been signed off on. But so I wonder if this is meant to be a little bit before that. The way that I read it personally is this is after, and this is really them confirming the fact, right? That they've already gotten this message, and Unohana, who is Captain of the Fourth, is confirming, in fact, yes, Aizen is dead. Which, being that she is the healer and the head of the 4th Division, which is known to focus on the healing arts, you could say, she is pretty much an authority on whether or not someone is dead. Now, the interesting thing here is, of course, Tosin brings up, because he's uncertain, right? He's like, is he really? And she confirms, yes. By the time that he was taken down, he wasn't breathing anymore. We're looking at the possibilities, including a gi guy. So she does bring up this idea that perhaps this is all just like faked, maybe. But for now, all that they know is that he is dead. So, if this is a gi guy, then it's certainly one that seems as lifelike as possible. I mean, it's not as though, we have another Aizen running around. So, as far as they can tell, because of course the captains would be able to sense their spiritual pressure, right? So, as far as they know, this is actually Aizen's corpse. He's actually dead. Actually, factually, for sure, absolutely dead. Now, Unohana does declare that, and we finally get a close-up of Unohana. We've seen her a little bit before, of Retsu Unohana, captain of the 4th Company, but here she's finally named. We finally have a confirmation of that, and I do like Unohana's character. She's very kind of presented in a very like downbeat way, I suppose. Like there isn't a lot that stands out about her compared to the other captains that have their eccentricities. Um, but the biggest thing that you can kind of note with her is that she has her hair worn down. She has this very kind of somber or melancholic or perhaps relaxed expression, and that her hair is braided across her front. I think that's the most notable kind of detail about Unohana, is the way that her hair it's this very, very long hair, and it's braided down the front in this braid. And I always felt like the front braid kind of was reminiscent of like the double helix of DNA. I always felt like maybe that was meant to be, or perhaps even um, the Hippocratic oath thing, right? The doctor symbol. Now I had to figure out what that thing's actually called. Um, this it's like a staff. Uh, ba ba ba. God, what is it? What is that medical icon? It's the Cataceus, right? The staff with the two snakes. That's it. It's notably it's the United States Medical Corps and Public Health Service, but it's actually a wand that was carried by Hermes, according to the internet. I just had to pull it up, but yeah, it's that kind of the twirl of the two snakes. I always read her braid as being a reference to that Cataceus symbol, right? That it was this sort of symbol of healing. Um, or like I said, like the kind of the double helix of DNA. Yeah. There's also apparently the rod of Asclepius. I can't words. The rod only has one snake. I think the Cataceus is the one that has both. Um, and there's more to that, and I will maybe discuss that a little bit in the spoiler section, because there's obviously going to be a lot to a lot of these characters, but things that I've always kind of read that as like her braid presenting Unohana as like a very well put together person, somebody who like has dedicated her life to healing and to being the head of the fourth company, right? I always felt it was reflective of her nature as a healer, and kind of binded her in that way. And plus, it's a neat look. It's very unique and understated, I feel. I think it's easy to be drawn to a lot of the more expressive looking captains that have kind of extreme designs, but I've always been a fan of Unohana's design. I always felt like it was pretty effective and efficient in the way that it was. And we get to see her Zanpakuto a little bit later, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. Of course, we get this close up on Tosin. He's got these goggles. We finally get to see his eyes. And yeah, Tosin, I love Tosin's look too. I mean, like, so many of these captains have a great look. Nevertheless, she's expressing that, yeah, we're going to decide another captain of the fifth in Central Chamber 46. It's the first time that Chamber 46 has been brought up, but it seems like it's a place where they convene to decide very important matters of the Soul Society. Interestingly enough, we do see, she rises up. She has the fourth icon. If we go back the page, we actually can see her lieutenant, who gets a whole dialogue bubble put over the lieutenant's face, which is, sad. But yes, the lieutenant of the fourth is here as well, although backgrounded pretty severely by the dialogue box, which is sad. But I do love Unohana. She's got this very arced Zanpakuto. I love the sheath on it. That it's very reminiscent to me immediately of the sash, like the kind of like the fact that it's got like this very long kind of connecting line from the hilt to the end of the scabbard. Immediately reminds me of the design of the sash that the fourth squad wears, right? That it's kind of like this sling that goes around you and has that like long strap. So it reminds me a bit of that. I do like the design. I really like the like kind of like, I would say, filigree almost. I don't know, like the golden sort of end of the end. I just read it as gold because I'm used to that being that way. But maybe whatever metallic sort of end of the design there is on this scabbard. It's really neat. I don't know what that can really tell us about Unohana herself, but I do like that she has kind of a different sword design, that it's this kind of long, curved sword. And interesting enough, she says that she will soon join them in the field. And so I think Unohana especially is anticipating grievous injury to be happening for her to join those others in the field, right? And here, we get both the vice captains, Iba and then Shuhei Isagi, who is finally named here. I don't know that Hisagi got named beforehand, but here he is in his glorious 69 tattooed face self. Now, I will say things about the 69 tattoo. 6 plus 9, obviously 15, Ichigo, haha. But I think that's kind of just like in my own head significance of it. I think the 69 tattoo is not reference to the sex number, but it's in fact something else that will finally eventually get explained, so you don't have to worry about that. Nevertheless, I do think that the tattoos on old Mr. Hisagi here are meant to kind of not just establish like some sort of otherworldly aesthetic that he is adhering to, but I like that also he's got like this large scratch across his face, these claw marks perhaps from a battle with a hollow, right? Um, so certainly Hisagi seems like the kind of person that's been through a few scraps, and I do like the kind of the like weird chunky chain that goes up across his shoulder to hold his Senpakto. And he's here with Iba, which we know Iba to be vice captain of the 7th, so that we can assume that the other character that is walking here is, of course, 7th Company, right? But we finally get confirmation, yes, Hisagi Shuhei, he is the vice captain of the 9th, vice captain to Kaname Tosen. We get to see Tosen from another angle here. I think we finally get confirmation here that, in fact, Tosen is the captain of the 9th. We finally get him fully named. Of course, we also get a little bit of insight into Tosen. We get that he's very like, okay, we got to resolve this problem. We have to get like this sort of truth of Aizen's death. We have to resolve all of this. He's going to join the fray, and he prefers to avoid battle. If he can, he'd rather not fight. And I think that's significant here, and we really do kind of see Hisagi's expression too as he realizes that it's gotten serious enough for his captain to be involved. And then, of course, we get a little bit more jump in. I didn't realize this at first. I think that this is all the way that I interpret this, and this is a panel that I will call out. I believe that this is all Tosen saying this. I don't think it's the other character having any lines here, right? I believe that this is all Tosen. Now, I could read it as like the Battle A line as being from the other character here, who has yet to be named, but I think this is all Tosen saying this. Which is rough, because you probably shouldn't block the characters this way if you want to really reflect this as Tosen, because you could read this as either one of them, which is not great. Therefore, that said, the expressions that are being had here certainly seem to be kind of coming from Tosen's mindset, right? That people are deceived by these ugly emotions, right? That if people didn't allow themselves to be drawn in by emotions, there wouldn't be any battles. And we could avoid these tragedies. And he hates battles, that they lead to tragedy, and then he'd prefer to maybe walk a path of less bloodshed, because it's one that's not fueled by deceptive emotions. And so it's interesting, because our introductory poem was talking about how killing one's emotions allows them to distance themselves from the beast, right? And certainly that's the mindset that Tosen has, is that we should be very distant from this sort of battle-hungry beast. And then, of course, I love that this is immediately, contrasted to the blood splatter and the swords clashing that is Ichigo versus Araki, as Araki very much is that sort of beast. And here we're given another juxtaposition, right? We're given a couple of them, but primarily between Tosen and his thoughts of, battle and bloodshed and hatred for battles, juxtaposed to the love of battle, that desire for conflict that Saraki has. But also we see juxtaposed just in height Tosin to the lad that is with him, who, as far as I understand, does not have any speaking lines here. I did want to talk a little bit about Tosin's design otherwise. We'll talk about the other fellow's design whenever he finally gets named. Big guy, biggin. There's a real big guy with a basket head. He's Captain Basket Head. That's that's what we'll have to refer to him for now. But I like Tosin's kind of weird fingerless glove. I think that's stylish. We get to see a little bit of his Zenpakuto, and then it has this little loop kind of here at the end, perhaps to ring a finger into. Tosin also wears a very notable sort of accessory here. He has this scarf that is pulled and tied almost noose-like, and I always found that kind of. I mean, like, yes, you could be like, first, black guy shows up, that's a serious character, and he's wearing a noose. Ha ha. Kubo, what are you trying to say? But I think moreover, it's meant to be reflective of the Hanged Man, which is, if you're not familiar with your tarot, all of that, right? The Hangman is one of the tarot cards. It's got various different interpretations, but essentially, it's one of the major arcana, which there's like a couple of them. You're probably like passingly familiar with a few of them if you've watched anime, because they always like to sort of, use these in different way. But Hangman typically is reflective of like some sort of sacrifice or giving up something, or being kind of caught between these different things that you're kind of caught in time or in space, or between different things, and you're going to have to make some sort of sacrifice. Of course, it being reversed or upright are different, as it is always with any tarot. But the idea is that, like, I think normally it's all about sort of having a sort of metamorphosis, breaking any sort of old patterns, kind of moving forward, moving on, right? This sort of death rebirth kind of thing going on. Whereas if it's reversed, it's the inability to move on. It's the inability to make use of any sort of opportunity or chance to kind of make that sacrifice. This unwillingness to. And I think Tosin does reflect a little bit of both aspects of the Hanged Man, of the tarot. If we're trying to kind of look at it less literally, because he is this person that speaks about, well, I'd like to avoid fights, but if I have to do this battle, I would. But, it's these people, there's emotions that draw them into battle. He's really kind of speaking towards this idea of like, well, I would rather avoid this conflict, but I'm going to have to become involved for whatever reason, right? And ultimately, to kind of hit to the truth of the matter, right? He has this line, resolving this problem is the quickest path to the truth, right? And Tosin wants to take that quick, direct path. He seems like a very direct kind of character. But yeah, I like that we do get those kind of aspects of him. We have him, expressing kind of a mindset that is different from a lot of the other Soul Reapers, perhaps, because Kenpachi certainly lies on the far end of, well, I got to do battle, I got to fight, I want to fight, I love fighting, and we've got Shunsui, who's kind of, well, I'll do it if I'm forced to, right? So it's interesting that we have yet another take on battle, which, of course, this being a battle manga, it's going to be pretty central. Nevertheless, I think Tosin's an interesting character. I think he has a pretty strong intro here. I feel like his intro here is perhaps a little bit more, leaves a little bit more of an impression than Unohana's, which is a bit understated. Which again, I think it's easy to overlook Unohana because she isn't one, making these huge declarations about hating battle or ugly emotions or whatever. And she also here isn't really being heavily juxtaposed to other characters, right? Whereas Tosin's really being used to show the difference between his mindset and Zaraki's, to kind of highlight the beast that Zaraki is. And I like that whenever we come back to this, we get the bloodshed first, and then we get the skittering of these blades across the ground and wall as they clash. And I love even here with the clash that you can definitely see, Zaraki is acting upon Ichigo, and we get that for sure in the reading of this page, right? It reads right to left. So again, it's naturalistic that we see Kenpachi bringing this energy against Ichigo, and even the clash up of this sort of like line work done here really shows that Zaraki is affecting Ichigo more than vice versa. And I love that Ichigo is even shown kind of flying up and off of the bottom of the panel here. I love as he lifts him up and essentially negates the force of Ichigo's blade being slung down. I love like like this look down, Zaraki's wicked grin, and then he grabs Zangetsu, and then spins it for the next page. And I love, again, the anticipatory action. It's just one panel, him grabbing Zangetsu, and then we turn page into this flip, and we see Ichigo too has been flipped after he's been knocked off of his feet, like in that moment. And I love that Zangetsu's kind of tassel, like the last of its little cloth here, helps to illustrate that spin. This is really well just kind of depicted. It really gives us that sense of motion, and I think the sound effect too, starting off kind of horizontal and then switching around like that, helps to sell it. And then as he's spinning Zangetsu, still holding it, I love this panel here, this thrust forward, right? And the information that we have of that panel is, of course, we know that Zangetsu is in front of Ichigo, in front of Zaraki, and so here Zaraki is kind of pulling it backwards while stabbing forward. It's a really cool maneuver, right? But Ichigo, he lets his one hand off of Zangetsu, he flips his body back as much as he can, and he only gets stabbed through his Shihakusho, which is like a quick kind of guard for Ichigo's part, a quick evasion. And as he's flipping back, he kicks off of Zaraki's hand, kicks his hand free of Zangetsu, which is really cool. Again, like the legibility of this, the quick back and forth between our characters. I love Ichigo landing just like very solidly, and he looks up surprised Zaraki's not there. And this is really subtle, but you can hear you can see the zing, like the ding of his bells, and that's how Ichigo knows that he's right above and behind him, and he's able to kind of block this oncoming attack. And I love that Zaraki expresses like, "Oh, good, you're concentrating, you're hearing the bells in my hair, I put all this stuff on to make the fight more interesting." And I do like that Ichigo brings up, what we might be thinking at this point, right? That, well, like, why do you do all this stuff to give yourself a this sort of disadvantage? Like, you're mocking me. You haven't even released your sword, right? That's something that I know, like, everybody should be able to do. All these, like, even the Force Eater guys are able to release their Zanpakuto, right? And I love Ichigo getting a little bit ahead of himself. Like, Zaraki's expression here whenever he's called out to release his sword, he's like, well, you better watch out. I can cut you now. It's like, Ichigo, come on. You're clearly not, like, pressing too much of an advantage. You're just surviving. But yeah, Zaraki expresses, his Zanpakuto doesn't have a name. His sword was never sealed. That this blade is his Zanpakuto. That he doesn't know its name. That it doesn't have a name. And Ichigo expresses, he's surprised at first, but then he's like, oh, cool, well, that means you won't release it and get stronger. And I love that Zaraki's answer is immediately to, like, press his blade to Ichigo's and kind of mock him for it, right? To be like, what? You can win? Like, the only reason that it hasn't been sealed is because his energy is so great he can't contain it, right? It's like, whenever I fight, I have to restrain myself, otherwise the fight would be over. So we get expression for, like, why he wears the bells, why he puts on the eye patch, right? It's because he can't seal his Zanpakuto. He doesn't even care about its name, but, like, his energy is so great that if he were to try to contain it, then it would be impossible, as far as he expresses. And this gives us maybe a little bit of insight into Ichigo, right? Because Ichigo, we can certainly read as constantly sort of being released or in Shikai. His sword is constantly released, and it's certainly reflective, right? This idea of having such great spiritual energy you can't contain it. Ichigo always sort of being on full blast. But I like that, the idea is that Zaraki, has to take under all these measures because he does have such great energy. Um, and of course, the ultimate culmination of that is that Ichigo is let down his guard enough that he's able to stab straight through Ichigo's sword. And this isn't the first time that Ichigo's Zangetsu has been cleaved through. We got a little bit of that in the fight against, or I guess, in the training that was against Urahara, where he was like, well, you're not really using your energy, you're not really infusing it with your energy, I can cut through it like butter, right? And I think that's the same sort of thing here, as Ichigo gets stabbed straight through the chest. And yeah, Zaraki's like, I told you, not to relax. Only a fool would think he can win like that. And you can see that there's like this clear disappointment on Zaraki's face that he wanted a greater battle, and he even expresses that, what a disappointing finish. And I do love, like this, especially like disappointment, the schluck out of him, the slick of Ichigo's blood on Zaraki's Zenpakuto, and then Ichigo falling to his knees in this very dynamic sort of shot with the two of them. And it's interesting, like there's almost like this rain of blood, even though Ichigo's only been stabbed. But I think it's effective. I think it works. Yeah, and that's it. I don't remember the voice that I did for Yasuchika Yamura, so I hope that I hit it well enough. I can go back to look. I think I gave him a pretty severe, like, I'm Yasuchika Yamura. But yeah, he is the third seat for fourth company, and so it's it's nice that we get a little bit of a reminder of him, and he has to kind of do this daily clinical log. We get a little bit of his duties here. But yeah, all in all, I think this chapter really helps to illustrate quite a few things. One, it really confirms to us, yes, Aizen is dead. It also speaks towards, we're looking into all the possibilities, including, they bring up this idea of a Gigai disguise. And I think that it's significant that the series reminds us of specialty Gigai constantly. We're reminded at the very beginning of the Soul Society arc the significance of Rukia's specialized Gigai and like it being very, very, special in a way, shockingly so, to Akon and Hyosu, I think, the 12th division, the research and development guys, right? And so again, we're reminded of Gigai that could perhaps be used as disguise. And that only further lets us kind of like have a different kind of take on what's going on with this conspiracy. Perhaps people could be even using disguises to look like other people, right? Who says that a Gigai has to look like the person that you are, So, like, I wonder, like, could you have to start to think, like, a Gigai disguise, like, you could make yourself look like anyone else using a Gigai, certainly. That hasn't been used in that way yet in the plot, but the idea of a Gigai disguise, or of a Gigai used to fake one's death even, is brought up here. Now, despite that, Unohana still confirms him as dead, right? That this is not a Gigai, even though that was one of the possibilities they were looking into. But they really wanted to confirm, and she's here to really confirm that Aizen is in fact dead. So you have to wonder, well, why are they looking at possibilities if she's confirming he's dead? And I think the significant thing to kind of take away here is just that Kubo wants to remind us of Gigai and of the potential of Gigai to be used in these different ways. Perhaps that'll come up later. Nevertheless, it is cool stuff. I do like their battling. I do like their back and forth. Lots of just Ichigo and Zaraki fighting, and ultimately us getting this kind of defeat of Ichigo. Like, it does a really good job of expressing, we had that kind of small victory of Ichigo's, right? Last chapter, he finally gets that cut on Zaraki. Maybe he could finally battle him. And then this chapter expresses, well, that's just the beginning, and Ichigo shouldn't let himself up because it opens him up to being wounded in this way, and even Zangetsu gets pierced through. And so we have to wonder, how if at all is Ichigo going to recover from this? Is this the end of the fight 2 chapters in? And I like that the title is evocative of that Zaraki is the one that is like a tiger, a beast, like a tiger and trying not to crush flowers. And I think that's kind of cute because, of course, Ichigo has been referred to before as Dandelion for his hair color. And so it's kind of adorable, the idea of, Zaraki being this beast that's doing its best not to just completely stuff Ichigo out. Even though ostensibly he doesn't want to fight Ichigo to the death, he wants to have an entertaining fight, right? Um, so it's interesting that, ultimately, kind of, even at this point, Zaraki, he's elated that Ichigo can cut him, but then he's quickly let down once more as Ichigo lets up his resolve and gets a little bit too kind of reassured by his short one, victory, if you can even call it that, by his little marginal success in the fight. Ichigo clearly is having a lot of trouble stilling himself. He falls quickly into despair, and then he quickly gets into this overconfidence, and we see how Ichigo feeling these very raw emotions and wearing them very clearly, how that can be a detriment for him. That having that sort of unshakable resolve, it means not giving in to these sort of temporary sort of despair or relief. That it means being focused and keeping that sort of focus throughout the entirety of one's fight, even whenever you think that you're winning or losing, which is difficult, honestly, especially for a character like Ichigo. But yeah, solid chapter all around. Good stuff. Let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about how it connects to the rest of the manga as a whole. And getting into it, of course, Yachiru, of course, being related to his sword, should have this insight into his actual self, since she is born of it, and she's even born of his desire to battle and everything, right? Kind of cute that we hop from Yachiru to Yachiru. Cute enough, right? I do like that Tosen's there to confirm that Aizen's wink wink really for sure dead. I love that Tosen's there to ensure that Unohana doesn't see through it. And then I love that Unohana is immediately like, yeah, it's probably a Gigai or some shit, but whatever, he's dead. Yeah, okay. Speaking of the Catechus, I brought that up. That there was, her entwined kind of hair snake, right? I think there were two different symbols here that I wanted to mention. First being the Catechus, the idea of her hair kind of resembling that with its braid, and I wanted to bring that up because notably the symbol itself is typically typically snakes are associated with deceit and destruction, whereas the Catechus is used as a symbol of healing. And the idea is that I think it goes all the way back to Moses, right, where Moses had used a serpent on a pole to cure people who had been bitten by snakes. The idea of having an antitoxin born of the actual toxin itself. The other idea being the serpent being tied to this idea of immortality, right? The serpent being something that could shed its skin and take on kind of new life. So certainly a lot of that holds true with Unohana, right? That she is this character who is serpent-like in the way that, one, yes, there is a level of deceit to her character, and that she is sort of hiding this past of hers, and if you think like a snake, truly a dangerous sort of snake in the grass figure, usually we think about Ichimaru again in that way, but truly Unohana is the one that has got this incredibly violent past, and ultimately has shed that old skin and taken up this other sort of mantle of the healing captain. That during peacetime she's sort of put that behind her. But interestingly enough, that she got into healing to only prolong battles, right? To only be able to continue to fight. And so I always love that. A lot of people, I always love that aspect of Unohana. I think one thing that a lot of people will say is they always felt, there are people that feel like the Unohana that we see in the Thousand Year Blood War is the real Unohana, quote unquote, and this is like some sort of deceit or falsehood of Unohana. I don't think that's the case at all. I feel as though whenever time called for conflict, Unohana was very driven to conflict. She enjoyed a fight, but she quickly realized that like there would be no one that would be able to give her that thrill. And it's interesting that she always had this sort of like, okay, well, I'm going to heal myself and perhaps even my opponent to continue to enjoy that fight, right? To continue to be able to battle. And then over time, she became sort of this, as things got more peaceful, as there were less enemies to defeat that were truly a threat. She ultimately found herself leveraging those healing techniques more and less of the combat stuff, just because she kind of was able to move on from that life, especially after having that interaction with Zaraki and realizing, that she could cultivate something more than just herself. And that idea that kind of turn from violence and destruction to cultivation and healing. It's interesting. That ultimately she creates, or I say she creates, it's arguable that she does, but that she is such a pillar of the fourth division that keeps the other Shinigami alive, because she is essentially doing on the macro level what she was already doing on the micro. She is creating this division to keep the Soul Society capable of fighting, capable of engaging in essentially warfare, although, with hollows it's pretty small scale, but in conflict. So she's changed in the way of how she personally engages with it, but I think her relationship to everything isn't deceitful. It isn't like she's, like lying to people about who she is even. It's just the scope in which how she engages with a fight is on a much more of a macro scale. And certainly I think maybe there's a level of compassion that she has learned over the years. So I feel like there's like, maybe there is a duality, and maybe the twin braids reflect perhaps a duality, but certainly the Catachaos imagery, I think, is absolutely reflective of who she is, of the healing staff, of the two sides of the snake, as both a way of healing one, but also being the thing that causes the damage in the first place. Yeah, and it's interesting that, of course, blood ends up being so integrally tied to her powers. So yeah, Unohana, really cool like aspect of her design that speaks so much to her nature as a character, and is something that most people just kind of overlook, is like her braided design and all of that. Same thing with again Tosin as the Hanged Man, all of that. I like of course, the arc of her sword reflects the sort of like crescent moon or eye kind of opening, perhaps even the sort of, I don't know, arc of a serpent, perhaps, but yeah, it's all tied to a bunch of really interesting visuals. Speaking of Tosin, speaking of things with Tosin, I did speak about the Hanged Man, right? And I think a lot of the imagery of the Hanged Man is also, immediately indicative of Tosin's situation, that he's going to sacrifice his, everything that he's kind of been in the Soul Society, and he's going to undergo this transformation. And ultimately, we see that it is a transformation into becoming, hollow and all of that, and that it's ultimately kind of not all that great for him. But that it's the idea that he is willing to kind of give all of this up, all for the sake of what he sees as his own justice, right? To kind of right things in society, and the Hanged Man, interestingly enough, is somebody that, like, more literally, a person who has been judged by society, right? That has been hanged, right? So interestingly enough, like his whole thing is that he's frustrated with the way in which society has incorrectly treated this person that he cared deeply about. And so his whole character is motivated by this desire to enact change in order to, see justice done, um, for the death of this person that he cared deeply for. Right. So it's interesting that we see how Tosin's, again, it's the connection to another's. It's this thing born out of death. It's tied into a societal kind of like how the society itself functions and his railing against the society. In a lot of ways, Tosin mirrors some of our protagonists, and he's caught up. Again, those themes. I love whenever Bleach is using its main themes to really all efficiently tie into a character, that's whenever it's working best. So Tosin, like again, he has this intense personal connection to somebody that fuels his motivations. Those motivations are at odds with society, are directly related within society, right? Um, and then of course that connection, that deep personal connection, is to somebody who has died. And so there's death, there's personal connection, and there's this individual versus society, all tied into what makes Tosin an effective character, and one that really feels really strong. And it's neat that he ends up becoming an antagonist, because typically a lot of those qualities are ones that we might associate with our protagonist, especially Ichigo, who did have someone very close to him die, and fights for what he feels is like actually right and just, and he will rail against society for it. It's just that I think the mode in which Tosin goes through it, the sort of transformation that Tosin is willing to undergo, the links for which Tosin is able to do. I like that he mentions trying to avoid battle, and then he wants to avoid conflict. And I think that's why he's willing to go along with a conspiracy. A lot of people will point this out about Tosin. They're like, well, if Tosin wants to avoid all this conflict, is he just saying this? Is this just like dishonest? I don't think it's dishonest. I think he's being honest with Komamura here. I think the idea is that Tosin really went along with Aizen's conspiracy because he felt like it would be a path of less bloodshed than either leaving the system the way it is, which just ends up with people injured, or going to all-out lore. Now, Tosin didn't see, the way that things would turn out, of course. But, nevertheless, I think he's willing to kind of go along with everything that Aizen's doing for all these years, because he wants to sort of like get to, with as little bloodshed as possible, the Soul Society changing dynamically. And the quickest way to do that, of course, is to put Aizen on the Soul King's throne, right? That's the hope, right? Is that with an actual arbiter to things, then these sort of injustices can actually be addressed, rather than just be the product of someone's gross emotions, right? Anyway, yeah, that's I like that. Of course, we do get that shot of Hisagi kind of looking kind of pained by the idea, almost, of, especially during the battle, this idea of fearing one's own blade maybe being evoked here, perhaps. Otherwise, yeah, I already mentioned kind of all this that this is referencing to. Big thing here, of course, the idea that this blade is his Impacto, that, you can speculate if he's in permanent release. I always assumed that, like, basically that Zaraki was always under this power to scale his power to his opponent, that, like, even if his blade isn't released, it still has that sort of functionality. Certainly, you can definitely read that his Zanpakuto is absolutely a Zanpakuto with a spirit, because obviously Yachiru is there, but also in that it's not just a simple Asauchi, it's actually got shape to it, it actually has a dynamic, unique form. I think that's significant, that's important. I mean, I think in the flashback chapters, it's still, I don't know, I had to go and see. it actually has this form or not, or if it's actually changed over the years. I think it actually still has this form, but I could be wrong. But yeah. I mean, that's about it. That's all I have to really say. I don't have very much other, things to connect across the series here. But if you do, please do let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching this one, folks. Please give the video a like if you made it to the very end here. Always do subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Please share this with anyone that you might think is interested in it. But otherwise, the other way that you can support the channel is always by supporting the Patreon for the channel. Right now on screen are everybody that supports the Patreon as of recording this video, and I do want to give a big shout out to all of you guys. Thank you very much. As usual, this has been Carker Gold, reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.